Lawsome by Consultwebs. Breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm with your host, Tanner Jones.
Hello to all our Lawsome listeners out there. Welcome back to the show. Today on the podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Earley, the founding attorney of Earley Law Group and the host of the Earley Show podcast series. In addition to a successful legal career, Chris is also an attorney coach, a columnist, ABA published author, and an entrepreneur. Chris stands as a passionate advocate for his injured clients. With nearly 20 years of experience, he's built a reputable law practice that prioritizes fighting for the rights of his injured clients. His commitment to providing educational content and being authentic, specifically on social media, has not only allowed him to connect with his audience, but has also set him apart from other lawyers in his area, which is naturally a critical piece for a successful business. So Chris, welcome, and thank you for finally making time to join the show.
Thank you, Tanner. Appreciate it so much. Thank you so very much for the opportunity.
Chris, you and I have known each other for quite some time. I've seen you around in the marketing circles, and I've always admired your ability to get things done. You're just that kind of guy, at least from what I've observed. And, I'd like for our listeners to learn a little bit more about what started the practice. What was that experience like? So if you could spend just a few moments speaking about some of the early days when you first started your practice. If my understanding is accurate, you came right out of law school and hung a shingle and started practicing law. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fair. I was in a sort of a quasi-partnership for about a year with another lawyer, but we just parted like gentlemen. But I look at it starting from the bottom floor, right? I don't come from lawyer parents. I have an unusual backstory, so that's advantage as well as a sort of disadvantage. But as I got going, I couldn't get a job, Tanner. The legal market in Boston. This is 2004. Just didn't want Chris Earley, right? I was unemployable. I kind of just had to start paying student loans. I just hung a shingle, and I just sort of said, I have to do this, if I want to eat, pay the rent. So that's how it took off by necessity, really,
And most good things do often they're forced out of necessity. But I'll say, naturally any business owner or any lawyer in particular that's starting this type of journey, they're going to encounter a ton of challenges, specifically in building that personal brand. So could you maybe walk back and speak to some of those obstacles or a key obstacle that you encountered in those early days?
They say youth is wasted on the young, right? So I was in my late 20s. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so some specific, challenges were just, I was walking into a PI market in Boston, right? I mean, it's not an easy space. We don't have really any, connections. I had no idea what I was doing. So I just, inch by inch, I used to advertise on Craigslist for my services, right?
That's great.
Personal injury lawyer, this is back in the day. I got good cases from there, right? And then other things, brought caused the phone to ring. But back then, it was just I used to hand out, flyers on cars. Real grassroots, very unsophisticated, it's kind of ugly marketing, right? But that is somehow got the phone to ring, got the cases. But, terribly challenging at first, Tanner, so many obstacles. But I didn't really know at the time because I was just young and dumb and just plowing forward. And, I guess I have an entrepreneurial sort of spirit. I don't know if I really knew it totally then, but I know now. So that was an advantage. So little things like that, a lot of luck, right? A lot of, things came together at the right time. And, but I'm really blessed to be able to, to say that it worked out because it could have gone sideways. Thank God it did it.
You reference luck, and I always find it fascinating. Some of the most successful people that, they point to luck, and I admire that. I admire the humility of it, but obviously there are some steps that are necessary to take in order to find that success. And really what brings us to this discussion today is around the concept of social media, because I've seen you use it extraordinarily well. You're the type of guy that I've experienced when you want to do something, you want to accomplish it, you're going to take the necessary steps with a practical plan to get there, and you're going to implement it. And sometimes that means failing forward to a degree and learning through that process. But I think starting a practice is akin to maybe some lawyers who have been in the practice for 20 years and now they're looking at social media in particular as potentially a very valuable vehicle to get their brand out there to the public. But they see challenges and obstacles all around them, probably much like you did in the early stages of starting your practice. Any advice to those lawyers in particular who may be dragging their feet on something they know should be done on a day-to-day basis?
All right. So in terms of social, where I started to gain traction was being authentic. I leaned into my backstory, which is I'm writing a book about it right now. I'm not a book to profit from, but a book to just put my story down. So I lean into my story, Tanner. A very dysfunctional upbringing. There's addiction, homelessness that I saw around myself. So I lean into my authenticity. Like there's a million lawyers in Boston. I could throw a football and hit 20 personal injury law firms, right? But, how am I different? So I look at it as, authenticity, right? Secondly, value. Like no one cares where you went to law school. They don't care about your grade point average in undergrad. Like that stuff is a snooze fest. It's boring. How are you going to solve someone's problem? How do you give value? I believe in educating, right? Infotainment, right? There's a little bit of selling, but that's a small, minute percentage. You have to, I think, give value, be yourself, be transparent. I'm not trying to appeal to everybody. I'm trying to this sort of, sniper approach, right? There's a segment of the market that wants to hear from Chris Earley, and the majority probably don't. So I just try to focus, lean into that audience. So there's a lot of things to do it. So, a lot of ways to do it. So what I did was, and I stole this from Ali Awad in Georgia. I went to his conference. He was just on my podcast last week, The Early Show. He was my second guest. And I was at his conference, and I went to the my hotel room, and I was like, I'm just going to put my story out there. And I did that. And then suddenly people were like, Chris, I had no idea. I just call it affinity was established or got going. Momentum. I'm not just a lawyer, I'm a person. And so I'd lead into just being myself. I don't know how it was going to be received, but it was received well. And then again, giving some value, right? Talking about, what should you be concerned about with an estate plan? What do you do after a car accident, right? So there's so many things you can talk about those topics, but just the point is educate, give value, people appreciate it. And also, Tanner, with social, you can't be verbose and chatty and long-winded. Get to the point. The currency, I feel, is engagement. Give them value fast, as quickly as you can, because, if you, Mr. Beast, he's a YouTuber. Yes. So the reason I bring him up is he is doing things differently, right? And I'm definitely not Mr. Beast. I'm never going to be Mr. Beast. I'm not trying to be, but being different, showing up. Not talking about, again, your law degree or your big verdicts, your big settlements. No, like just be yourself. I'm just trying to be Chris Earley, just who I am, take it or leave it. And I think that's what, I referenced Mr. Beast. He just, sort of found something and went all in. And that's what I'm doing. And that's my all in, is being authentic, right? I'm not trying to get 100 billion subscribers or whatever on YouTube. I'm trying to be myself. So I'd encourage you, the lawyers on the podcast, lean into who you are, help, give value, make it quick. Don't be verbose. Us lawyers, we talk a lot. Get to the point, help, and then keep doing that. That's what I've found kind of success.
I love that. And I do think that that's often, talking about some of these obstacles or stumbling blocks, it's between our own ears. It's ourselves that's holding us back. And maybe if you've kind of alluded to this, but can you speak to some of those, I'll call them vulnerabilities, or a willingness to be vulnerable, to put your story out there? I think that takes a pretty big, huge leap of faith, especially if we're honest with each other. There is this often a facade that lawyers will put on, right? And trying to position themselves or posture themselves in a certain way to the community, but you nailed it. Like we hear about authenticity all of the time, but you spoke to that specifically and what that means to you. But what about some of those vulnerabilities, if you're willing to share that?
Yeah, I mean, I lead into, having, experienced, a father who lost everything, because there's people who relate to that. There's trauma involved. People relate. There's a lot of people out there that have some trauma. They say, oh, I kind of pick up what this guy's putting down. He's not your average lawyer. And kind of, just hearing what you just said, Tanner, I hear that as sort of being disruptive. Stopping the scroll. Like, this guy is kind of different. He's not just talking about how great of a lawyer is and, how big his ego is. He's a real dude talking about real stuff. And then, at some point in the conversation on social, we slide in what we do, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're in a business to make money, right? We have to support ourselves and our families. So there's a time and a place to talk about those settlements, right? Mm-hmm. But that's a small silo of the content, right? But the more, if people care about your story, anyone listening to this, people care. They want to know, how are you different? People enjoy, we're humans. We love stories. We love sharing stories. It's like that for forever. So share your story, talk about it. And I double down. That's where I look at the book that I'm writing. I'm probably going to lose money in the book, but I don't care. Just another way to double down. Here it is. If you want to read it, here it is. And this creates opportunities. This is just a natural consequence, right? You and I are talking. This is an opportunity, right? My podcast opportunity, speaking engagements, writing engagements. It's like this flywheel keeps spinning, and I'm not doing anything sophisticated. I'm not like the sharpest tool. I'll get the stuff done, and I'll just do the work and repurpose the work, and good things have kind of come about, right? But there's a lot of misses. But we try to put as many balls in the air as we can to try to succeed. Does that make sense?
It sure does, and I think that may be worth touching on, because there are certain maybe more methodical or process-driven lawyers that are listening, and they want more of an action step potentially, or they want to better understand, do you approach this in a goal-oriented or a milestone-oriented way? Have you attempted to approach your brand building, whether it be social media or outside of social media, in a more strategic way where you've been intentional with milestones or benchmarks or goals even?
In terms of goals of social, I haven't really set that in terms of how many followers are engaged with. I just want to see where this thing can go to. Mm-hmm. And so I look at this ecosystem of marketing assets. You got your social, a pod. I would encourage everyone, start a podcast, right? This is SEO friendly content. There's just so many things. I write for the ABA, I write for Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, giving value. I never say, hey, refer me a case. I'm in Boston. It's like, here's what I'm experiencing, the hiring front. Here's what I'm experiencing in my practice, right? Here's what experience with marketing. So I don't really have an end in mind in terms of, a ultimate goal for social, just to see what, intentional focused work can bring over a long period of time. Because that has been sort of my personal recipe. And everything I do, Tanner, it may not be for everybody, right? This is just my sort of style. You may be a little more shy or reserved. Maybe you don't want to lead into your story, and that's completely fine. But you got to be different, right? I don't see any sense in shouting from the rooftops the loudest, hire me, I'm a lawyer. There's everyone shouting that. How can you be different? I found my different. I lead into it. How can you find your different? Be a little disruptive, and I think unconventional. We're a very boring profession, right? A lot of vanilla stuff. And I just throw in some variety, right? A little bit, tastefully shocking. So I don't mean being a clown, but I think you have to be a little bit unique if you want to stand out in all the noise.
I would agree, and I think that's sound advice for our listeners, because it is often a challenge on necessarily knowing, what direction do I want to go, and one of the last questions we often ask is, who are we? Who do we represent? How do we help? How do we change lives? And start there, because naturally that's ultimately who you want to portray. It's yourself. That's the easiest one to portray. While we're on this social media topic, I do want, you've touched on your podcast, and I want to get to that topic because I think there's value in that and taking that effort or the initiative. But before we get there, let's talk generally about some of maybe the highlights or some of the real advantages that you've seen. You've started this specifically on LinkedIn. I've seen you getting more and more active and involved on that social platform. But have you experienced any notable positives that have come from this, whether specific to you, new cases coming in, business influences? Maybe speak to that.
Sure. I hate to say it again, but this flywheel, I keep talking about that, right? I just keep trying to spin it every day in some way. A couple of good books that really move the needle for me. There's a principle called Kaizen. It's a Japanese approach to optimization. I think Toyota incorporated that. Just every day I try to get a little bit better, 0.1%, wherever that is, right? So sustaining that. But yeah, LinkedIn, there's referrals, there's the speaking opportunities. There's podcast opportunities, just networking opportunities. I'm really leaning into LinkedIn. Right, I think that's a blue ocean, and I've said it before. I think LinkedIn is a fantastic resource. Now, it takes time. I have to, come up with the content because I care about giving good stuff. I don't want to, again, be a snooze fest, boring. Let's stop the scroll. What is this? Why should I pay attention? That's what this is about. Attention, right? Attention is the currency. Disrupting in a value, focused way. But LinkedIn, that to me is a social platform that I think is neglected. I think when we hear social, it's like, oh, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. No, LinkedIn is I think where I leverage a lot of my time. But I just want to add quickly, Tanner, so our strategy here with social, I told you about, that hotel room in Georgia, put my story out there. Then what I did is, given the engagement that caused or engendered, then I started putting money behind it, right? And making it a paid ad so that people, they'd see the ad. If they liked the content, they'd be encouraged to like the page, the Facebook page or Instagram page. And this keeps spinning that wheel, right? Of a greater audience that's going to be receiving that content. I'm a big believer in repurposing assets. Recently, I've been leading into TikTok. So I'll make a video on my phone, edit it, post it to TikTok, post it to Instagram, post it to YouTube as a short, post it to Google My Business. You said before, this ecosystem, right? This is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of work. Well, I don't mind it. I kind of like it.
Well, that's it. That's it. And it is a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work with respect to being intentional about it. Everything you've already alluded to, yes, that takes not only physical action work, but it takes mental preparation, research, studying. You identified LinkedIn, and maybe let's take a quick moment. Why LinkedIn over other social platforms for you?
Because I look at that as a great referral opportunity. There's a lot of professionals, a lot of lawyers, right? But I believe you have to have lines in multiple oceans, right? So when I see LinkedIn, I'm generally thinking lawyers, right? So I have a weekly email that goes out. It's called This Week's Need to Know Practice Tip. It's for my whole attorney audience, right? We also have an attorney newsletter in the mail. But anyway, I just recently realized today, hey, I should use that weekly email to my attorney list where I give value. Put that on LinkedIn, or we're repurposing stuff, or just moving it around. Because sometimes, one thing can be used 8 different ways, frankly, this exponential stuff.
That's the point to stress here. And you haven't said necessarily the word recycling, but that's really what it is. It's repurposing. It's leveraging one good, solid effort and turning it into, multiple pieces of content, as you've suggested. And with your podcast, The Early Show, this is a phenomenal place to be recycling content. And for our listeners, Chris has already encouraged you, if you don't have a podcast, you should explore this, because one 30-minute conversation, you very well could pull out 3, 4, 5 talking points, 1 to 2 minute talking points. Now you have the ability to start cutting and editing up some of that content, repurposing it, and creating awareness that way. And so, Chris, thank you for hammering that point, because we can't stress that enough. It's taking that initial effort and then finding ways to re-leverage that over time. And you've done such an incredible job with that. Any advice or any challenges you've ran into in that process that you could speak to help our listeners?
So with the podcast, there's a story behind that. My first guest was John Morgan, right? How did I get John Morgan the podcast? Well, this started a couple of years before. He was on Michael Mogul's Game Changing podcast. And one Sunday morning, I listened to John Morgan's episode with Michael Mogul on Michael Mogul's podcast. And I emailed John Morgan, long story short, about a year later, because I'm a persistent dude, probably, I just, not in a distasteful way, but I just kept following up. Hey, John, can we have lunch? Finally said yes. And so he and I had lunch. And that meeting, Tanner, really changed my game, because it was a confidence booster. I got him to lunch, and that I took his opportunity to pick his brain. And I got a take on how he started his career, how he hustled, how he was a union rat, just hanging out in unions and just hustling. And that speaks to my language. And he and I were both paper boys. So that was the email I sent to him initially. Hey, John, we're both paper boys. And he, I don't know why, but he decided to meet with me. And he gave me 2 hours of his time, a focus. He wasn't like at his phone. He's just a good dude. He's generous. That's why he's so successful. Anyway, so I want him on my podcast to be the first guest, because that's a good way to come out of the gate hot, right? Hey, and then we followed that up, Ali Awad, right? I always want to give value. I want to do things, right, as best as I can. But I think, Tanner, I would encourage anyone on the listening, you got to take risks. You have to be persistent, right? The only reason why John Morgan gave me the time of day was I was just persistent. And when we sat down together, he said, boy, you're persistent. I thought that was a really big compliment, because thank you. I really appreciate that. Ali Awad, when he's on my podcast, we weren't really getting into tactics as much as like his story and how my story, we sort of related on that front, like deeper stuff. And I think that was a really good exchange. That's going to come out soon. That's episode 2. And all I'm saying is take risks, lean into what you want to do. But don't be boring. I just feel like boring is so common. We have to stand out a little bit and, show up a little bit differently.
And the final thing that you haven't mentioned, but I'll state just because you've done that, is it's take action too. You can assume, you can consider the risk all you want, but just as you've done, you've started to put one foot in front of the other, and that's ultimately what makes you successful. And as you said, the concept of Kaizen, just consistent improvement every single day, even if it's nominal improvement, it's progress. And so again, I applaud you for that, Chris. Any final feedback or thoughts to share with our listeners as we wrap up here?
Yeah, just real quick. I just want to say, you kind of alluded to this. Done is better than perfect. You're that marketing piece, you could obsess over, the font's wrong. Like, just put it out to see and let it go and see what happens, see what it brings back to you. That's, what I do here is like, I just let it ride. I go with my gut. I don't sit on stuff. I just, again, done, better than perfect. That to me was one sort of small hinge that opened a big door, right? To just get it done. And that it empowers you. Okay, that thing failed. So what? I'm going to try this thing and just keep, testing and tweaking, experimenting. I'm a student, Tanner. I am learning. I am just getting started. So I'm a humble dude. I'm grateful to be in this position. Be talking to people on podcasts. Like, this is freaking awesome. So, but there was a lot of work that got us to this point. But what I'm doing is something special. I'd encourage everyone, take a risk, do what you want to do, and I encourage you, if you'd like, reach out to me. I'm an open book. I share my stuff. I believe in abundance. I'm not, some tight-fisted guy here. There's plenty of opportunity out there for all of us. We can all win, and so I'm just really excited for the future.
How can our listeners find you, Chris?
Check out our website. It's earleylawgroup.com. Like I said, I have a lot of content for lawyers that I put out. I have a weekly email. It's just a piece of content, sort of inside baseball, how we're doing things here. That hopefully helps the audience, as well as a monthly newsletter where I provide my ABA article for that month, as well as some other, sort of nuggets of wisdom that I hope help in some way, that have helped me. And so I encourage you, email me at cearley@earleylawgroup.com, or again, website earleylawgroup.com. Happy to talk anytime. I'd love to. Obviously, I'm a geek. I love this stuff, so I want to talk about it. So reach out. Don't be shy.
Please do. I've always thoroughly enjoyed conversations with Chris, and to clarify, the Earley Show podcast and referencing his firm name, Earley, EARLEY. The Earley Show. How can listeners find your podcast?
I believe it's on Apple Podcasts. It's on YouTube, obviously, Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well. As you can see, I'm pretty new to this. So.
And what about the book? In any mention of the book, how can we watch for that book? When will it be released?
Hopefully by the end of the year. I'm telling you, Tanner, it's so much freaking work to write a book. I've written car accident books, slip and fall. Okay, but this is different. This is a true challenge. So I'm really excited to see, not only for my kids here, but to see Dad's story, but to see what doors open up. If I can speak to an audience of kids that are growing up around addiction, trauma, I would love that platform. That to me is like deep work, and I'm just so excited for the opportunity. But hopefully at the end of this year it's out, but it's been a lot of work, but it's worth it.
I can only imagine. Chris, thank you so much for everything you're doing for this industry, everything you've done within your practice, but also for joining the show. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Tanner. Thank you so very much.
Lawsome by Consultwebs with Tanner Jones. For show notes, links, and info, go to consultwebs.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Watch for the next Lawsome episode to discover more breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm.